habits. How do we kick the bad ones and pick up the good ones?
The most recent bad habit that I picked up was vaping. I was doing it without even knowing. It was crazy.
What do you remember about your first day of freedom after you were released from jail?
Got up out of bed in my own bedroom, folded my own blankets up and put them on the end of my bed and stood at the door waiting for someone to open it.
What's a habit?
A behaviour that we've repeated so often, it's become automatic.
I was breaking old habits of not going to the fridge and drinking wine and eating cheese.
Prison and the life of it is so repetitive, and it's not only in the things that you do, it's the things that you say and the conversations that you have. It's defined who I am as a person, the strengths and the weaknesses. There's no control at all of your life. You do what you're told, and it's very regimented. If you're doing the same thing every day, you're not going to live a different day the first day you're out. You're not going to change or conform instantly, you know, creatures of habit. We all do what we do, and sometimes it's, you know, enforced into you, bashed into you, instructed into you, or sometimes it's learnt. I've never worn a watch in prison. I haven't worn a watch out of prison in 11 years. So what do I want to watch for? I'm doing on time. You want me to look at it every second? The routines of prison really do stick hard. I'm starting to find that it's really difficult to change that repetition. You know, I still don't go out at night. I felt the need to change my rooms, going from my bigger room to my smaller room. Why? Because I'm more comfortable in there, I sleep better. It's no different than cell 24 in Sea Yard. My entire life. I mean, it's all been one habit, but that's institutionalisation and what it does to you. I revert many times back to prison and the way I used to deal with things. In prison, you stop looking up. What you want to see, the sky and the stars and the clouds and all the beautiful things in life that, you know, you just don't see. So you just don't look up, and for years and years and years, I didn't.
Tony, you were in and out of jail for 20 years.
Yep.
What were your crimes?
Just dishonesty crimes, you know, cash registers and, in the end, cracking safes with a couple of mates.
So you were a career criminal for more than half your life. What do you remember about your first day of freedom after you were released from jail?
Got up out of bed in my own bedroom, folded my own blankets up and put them on the end of my bed and stood at the door waiting for someone to open it. I didn't know that I could.
Wow, because you're so used to that happening.
Just a creature of habit, you know.
So for you, those habits were a result of institutionalisation. Is this a common experience for other ex-prisoners you know?
It's very common amongst long-term inmates. You know, if you're doing the same thing every day without any difference, the same thing every day, it just becomes such a habit, it's your normal. To understand the concept of institutionalisation, you really have to understand the concept of a containment and control system. You've got no life of your own. You do exactly what you're told or walk between the yellow lines.
Can you give us an example of, say, someone you've known where that institutionalisation remained?
A friend of mine, he'd been out of jail for probably 5 or more years, done a life sentence, a long time in prison. And me and a friend helped him move, and we'd finished moving him one day, and we were sitting in the lounge room waiting for a cup of coffee, and I looked around and it was exactly the same as his prison cell in B Yard in 1986. And I said, look, what's going on, man? This is no different than your cell. That was all he understood and all he knew. But yeah, really hard habits to break.
How difficult is it to change that institutionalised mindset?
It's extremely difficult without help. It's a big culture shock, and even still to this day, my last sentence was 2011, and I've still got to remind myself that, oh, you can't behave that way. And, you know, I've gone from a life of, you know, a criminal life where you're always watching and observing and looking for an opportunity. I still look and I still see, I just don't do the things that I used to do. But yeah, change is extremely difficult. Yeah.
Dave, you've kicked many bad habits over the years. What was the most recent one?
The most recent habit the bad habit that I picked up was vaping. If you look around in society now, you see people just sucking on these things that look like highlighters as they walk down the street. And I think the government's trying to stop it now, but the genie's out of the bottle, really. So there's just kids vaping, there's adults vaping, and, you know, there was me vaping. It started when Albanese won the election that night. Someone handed me something and they told me there was no nicotine in it. And I said, okay, and then I had a suck on it and my toes started tingling, and it was a really pleasurable experience. And before I know it, I was hooked on vaping. So yeah, it was crazy at the age of 51 to have taken it up. My wife thought I was going through a midlife crisis. It was like crazy.
So did it become problematic?
Yes, absolutely. I was vaping. Every night I'd say, no, I'm not going to do it tomorrow. And then I was doing breakfast radio. So then I'd find myself at 4:30 in the morning vaping again. I was vaping in a studio. I remember once one of the, our guy who does the videos said, we can't use that interview. And I said, why not? He said, you were vaping during it. So I was like, I was doing it without even knowing. I was vaping on TV. It was crazy.
Were you trying to hide it sometimes as well?
Absolutely hiding it from my family, and I'm a clean living guy, and so I was hiding it from my wife and my children. Distinctly remember once getting it, because I'd pick the kids up from school, and then I wasn't able to vape then because I didn't want them to see me vape. And I remember giving them the credit card so they could go into the convenience store to buy some stuff. And I said, take your time, because I just wanted to vape in the car. And they got back. When they got back in the car, my son, who was 13 at the time, his last year, said, it smells like vape in here. I actually lied to him. I said someone was walking past, recognised me, and I wound down the window, and they must have vaped into the car. So
Wow.
I actually said that to him. So yeah.
Wow. And pretty quickly you made that up too.
I made it up trying to, to hide my dirty little secret.
What other habits in your life have you kicked?
I've kicked a lot of habits, so I am very good at giving things up. So there's a long list. I stopped drinking alcohol back in 1992 as well, so I haven't had any alcohols in that whole time. Stopped smoking marijuana back then. Adult content, I do not, my kids can have my phone and there's nothing on there that, they shouldn't see. So I've given that up, which is, again, that was tough as well. I'm a vegan as well, so I've given up meat, I've given up cheese.
Wow.
Yes, I've given a lot up.
And this was around the time, say with marijuana and alcohol, that was around the time you started your comedy career, right?
Yes.
Would you have been able to do comedy if you'd kept those habits up?
I don't think so. I mean, when you are, you've got bad habits, including marijuana and alcohol, not for everyone, because I know a lot of comedians who are just off their heads the whole time. So, but for me, I don't reckon I would have had the mental fortitude to be able to start stand-up comedy and start that comedy career. I don't reckon I would have got myself together enough to be able to do it. So, yeah.
How do you define a habit?
Well, it's something you do every day, I would say, or that you want to do every day. So I think I have an addictive personality, and so it's harder for me to, I see people who smoke once a week and just think they're magicians. Like, I don't know how you could, smoke once a week and then stop for a week. Yeah, so people who can have 2 beers and then go home, I think they're amazing. I just don't know how they do it, so yeah.
Gina, you're a behavioural scientist and you study habit change. What's a habit?
The simplest way to explain it is a habit is a behaviour that we've repeated so often in the same context. And with time, it's become automatic in our brain. So, for example, putting on your seatbelt is often a habit, and the context for that is sitting in the car. We don't get the urge to put on our seatbelt in any other place. So all our habits are triggered by something, whether that's in our internal or external environment.
Do we do them mindlessly?
Yes. Most of our habits are subconscious and they are mindless. And they can be the littlest things, like how we tie our shoelaces. If you think of the very first time you learnt to drive a car, you used pretty much every brain cell to do this activity. And now we get to places and we think, how did I get here? I don't even remember driving. So those behaviours do become subconscious and automatic.
When we think of habits, we often think of them as bad. Can habits be good?
Of course, yeah. Habits can be good or not so good for us, and they can also be neutral. So some of our not so good habits might be like nail biting or drinking, whereas some of our good habits could be exercising or making sure there's salad on our plate. And then our neutral habits are things like using our dominant hand to open the door, for example, instead of our non-dominant hand. That doesn't give our life any benefit. It's just something we do automatically.
Dave, you've talked about some of your bad habits. Do you have any good habits?
Absolutely, I do. I've started to eat an apple every day. I mean, that sounds very simple, but to be able to do that and do that every day is something I'm proud of. I'm actually looking around. I actually asked one of the producers for an apple today, to be honest.
Gina, what's the difference between a habit and a routine?
Our habits are automatic and they're triggered by our environments, whereas routines is something that we might do every day still, but we're consciously still thinking about them. So, for example, driving to the gym might be a habit, or getting to the gym might be a habit, but the workout that you do might be a routine because it's different every day.
Why do we form habits?
The reason we form habits is because we make tens of thousands of decisions every single day. And if we had to make each and every one of those decisions consciously, we would be completely exhausted. So our brain creates habits as a means to preserve energy so that we can put those mental resources towards other more important decisions.
Mac, you're a neuroscientist. What is going on in our brains when we form a habit?
I think there's a really interesting analogy that kind of helps you understand how the brain is solving a problem like a habit. So the idea is, let's imagine that the brain is something like a restaurant. You have people coming into the restaurant that are wanting to have food, and the wait staff receive them. The wait staff would be like the cerebral cortex, the outer layer of our brains. And when they receive their order, they pass it down to the kitchen. The kitchen will be what we'd call the cerebellum, to the base of our brain. And the cerebellum actually has about half of the neurons in the brain. It's an incredibly powerful resource. What it does is it makes all the food, right? Presents forward the food to the person who's looking to eat. They eat their meal and off they go. Now, imagine the first day of a new restaurant opening. The head chef is going to be absolutely so stressed out, right? They don't know who's going to come in the door. What are they going to want to eat? Is everything running well in the kitchen? It's an absolute mess. But over time, you start to develop these sort of canals and paths in the process to make it more and more efficient. The more you do it, the more you can do it again, and you start to become more and more effective. And so a habit in this context is the cortex and the cerebellum learning how to balance out who's going to do what so you can work effectively.
Once we learn a new habit, how does our brain then store it so it can use it automatically?
Yeah, we're only really starting to figure out how this works. But one of our best guesses at the moment is that every time you're presented with another situation, like let's say you're presented with a vape cigarette, you then have a little path that's formed in your brain. The cerebellum will then reach out towards that path. You get a big fat reward. It's a little bit like a little bonus bit of dopamine that kind of reinforces that circuit, and that becomes reinforced and reinforced and reinforced to the point where the cortex doesn't have a chance. By the time the vape's there, you're reaching out and grabbing it before you know it.
So it's like a shortcut.
Like a shortcut, yeah.
Kate, what bad habit were you looking to kick?
I had a lot of bad habits that I was trying to kick, but to Gina's point, the very first thing was the goal that I had. And so for me, the goal was to lose weight. And every year I would set out to lose weight, and it would usually be 10 kilos. That was my goal at the beginning of the year. And along with that came the bad habits, which were things like drinking alcohol every day. I would dine out a lot, and I would emotionally eat and comfort eat and all of those things in between. So for me, I had a lot of bad habits, if you like, or unhealthy habits that were leading to not being able to fulfill that goal.
What were your feelings around your body?
I was always extremely uncomfortable, and I was somebody who was very unfit. I didn't exercise at all. And so for me, the concept of moving my body was really foreign.
So what changes did you make?
Well, for me, I made like 100 to 200 little changes. And when people used to ask me, what have you done? Like, what are you doing? Tell me what your secret is. I remember being like, okay, well, hang on a minute. Where do I actually start? What am I actually doing? Because it was so small, all the things that I was doing. But one of the most important things that I found that I did was I really wanted to break the habit of coming home from work and going straight to my fridge and reaching for a glass of wine and the cheese and overeating on snacks, etc., before dinner, and then being sedentary for the rest of the night. So I made a decision that for me, I would like to come home, put my sneakers on and walk out the door. And that was all I wanted to try and achieve.
Wow. So when you first did that, how far did you walk?
I was living in a suburb and I walked to my neighbour's letterbox, so like a few metres, and then I felt really uncomfortable. I felt a little bit exposed, is probably a good word, and so I came back and I walked inside the house, but I was happy because my goal and my action was to put my shoes on and walk out the house, which I did. So I self-monitored and gave myself a tick still. And then the next day I went to my neighbour's house, and then after that I slowly sort of did the loop around my block, and then eventually I layered on that and I went up a little incline, and then next minute I'm doing like a really big loop. And so then it just evolved from there.
How much weight did you ultimately lose?
I lost 30 kilos and kept it off, and I was quite shocked at that because I remember when I was losing weight, I remember I said to my husband, "Oh my God, I'm losing all this weight." And we realised it was because there was an accumulation of such small tweaks to my everyday existence that was leading to me losing all this weight without me consciously realising overall that that's what I was doing.
Sally, you subconsciously developed some habits which didn't benefit you. What were they?
I became a workaholic, essentially, and that's a culmination of habitual behaviour, as I'm sure everyone would agree. So essentially it is framed around waking up thinking about work first and foremost. Everything in my world revolved around work to the point it burnt me out, not once but 3 times. And burnout is definitely a significant culmination of toxic habits. And those habits would go from anything like waking up at 5 in the morning. First thing I would do is pick up the phone, check emails, check messages, and before I'd even put my feet on the floor, I was in work mode. I became so based around habits. My day in the office didn't start until I'd had at least 2 coffees. Then I would go into the office, and then it would literally be going through my to-do list and just working around the clock, essentially. I'd leave work, and then the next habit of arriving home would be a glass of wine because, wow, I've made it through the day. That became a habit which led to more alcohol being consumed to numb my stress, numb my burnout, and then falling back into working again well into the evening.
What do you think it would have been like to be around you as colleagues or friends or a partner at that time?
Awful. I can laugh now, but yeah, and I do recall someone very close to me coming up to me and saying, "I think it's time you took a break." And I highly likely would have snapped and said, "I'm fine." But yes, it did impact on other people.
Where do you think you learnt those habits, that sort of working so hard?
I believe it comes from conditioning. It is definitely something that you see growing up. It's very much those habits around constantly hearing, "Oh, you know, you must work hard to get ahead," and that's the way, you know, that is success, is working hard.
Gina, once we decide to learn a new habit, how do we actually go about it?
There are 5 steps, I guess, that I've put together to help people to create new habits. And the first step is to decide on a goal, to really be firm in what it is that you want to do. The second step is to choose a simple action that's going to move you towards that goal. The third step is to pair that behaviour with something in your environment. So that could be the time of day, the place that you're in. And then once you encounter that trigger in your environment, actually do the habit.
How long can it take to form a new habit? Is it overnight? Months?
I wish it was overnight. I'd be out of a job if that was the case, though. We often hear that it's 21 days or 28 days. It is a myth. I feel like if I had a podium and only one thing to share with the world, it would be, it doesn't take 21 days to change a habit. It can actually take anywhere between 3 weeks and up to a year to create a new habit. The average time is around 66 days or about 10 weeks. So the more complex the behaviour is that you're trying to create, the longer it's going to take to develop behaviour.
What about the length of time it would take to kick a bad habit?
I wish we had evidence for this. We don't, because there are so many variables. I've seen people kick a habit after just one day, and others have taken years, if not decades, to try to break a habit.
Dave, I just want to go back to your apple example. Does that sort of make sense, what Gina's saying? Like, did you have to consciously decide to do it and then put some routine in place to make sure you eat the apple?
Yes, absolutely. And then there's still days I miss, and it disappoints me.
So, like, you had a goal of being healthy and then decided the apple's the way to do it?
Yes, and also I've decided to do 4 minutes of push-ups per day and look at my guns. But I'm trying to stick to that, and that is not an easy thing to stick to. It's like 4 minutes a day, but I battle on, because that does hurt.
So I'm usually in the kitchen from like 8:30 in the morning till I work right through till midnight. I don't stop thinking about food. I don't stop thinking about how I can improve something. It's slight changes in your habitual way you do things. It's pretty much clockwork. It's funny when I eat something that's very similar to something that I've eaten years ago, I still remember the first time I had that flavour. It's like it goes into a little library bank in my head. It's a unique brain to be very creative, but also disciplined in how everything comes together. And when I'm thinking of a dish, it's all happening in my head, and I can taste everything now. It's constantly more than I would say at least 3 things always going on in your head. It's a constant go. Yeah, okay. Oh God, that's stressful. All right, okay. I taught myself. I just sort of pretended I knew how to do it and figured it out myself. You don't realise, until you start teaching someone how to do something, you don't realise how all the little things, the nuances that you do. So when I'm training someone, they're like, so why do you do that? It's repetition. I have my day set out to the minute. Every time I do something, even now, I try to do it better than the last time I did it. I think it's a skill you have to learn. I've got 1 peanut allergy, 1 pescatarian, 1 nut allergy anaphylactic. If I can keep to a routine, my brain's not thinking constantly about that routine. It turns into a habitual thing every day. And then my brain sort of can start thinking about other stuff. Everything in my life is an obsession.
Julian, as well as your career as a top chef, you're also a family man. Is your life outside the kitchen also pretty regimented?
It is. I run the whole week, basically that regimented. I cook all the meals on a Tuesday afternoon for the week so that my wife doesn't have to worry about it when she's home alone to feed the girls when we get home from school. And we're doing this on Sunday, we're doing this on Monday. We have tacos on Tuesday. We might have rice paper rolls on Monday, and the girls sort of fall into that too. They're like, oh, it's Taco Tuesday or it's rice paper roll Monday. Yeah.
So would you say your home routine is a habit?
I'd say it is.
Habits that you've built up over years help you in the kitchen, but can habits sometimes get in the way of being a good chef?
I think so. If you're too regimented, I find that people who have had a really formal training, I don't have a formal training. They come in and they have to have their knives set up exactly like this, chopping board like this, and they have to cook a certain way. And I think that in the way that I'm creative, I don't follow any of those rules, so I don't have the habits that that's the only way you can cook it, or that's the only way you can do it.
Dave, when you're doing a stand-up set and there's sort of part of it that just comes naturally through that habitual nature of your job, and then there's a creativity on the top where you're sort of riffing, I guess? Yeah,
absolutely. And interesting about whether, you're trained or not. When I first started doing stand-up comedy, I hadn't seen much stand-up comedy, so every night I would go on stage and tell different stories, and some of them would bomb. And the comedians who'd been doing it for quite a while thought I was insane, is because I wasn't just doing the same thing every night.
Yeah.
But a part of that was being naive, and it was a really good thing for me so that I was able to explore more rather than being regimented. I know comedians who are, for 15 years who say, I don't know why my career's gone nowhere. And I said, well, because you're doing the same 10 minutes you did 15 years ago. So, yeah, so you've got to, in life, explore as many things as you can and try to, I imagine, get out of the habits that you're in a lot of the time so that you can grow.
Mac, is there a golden number of times we need to practice something in order for it to become automatic?
Yeah, I think this is another one of those myths. This is sort of classic 10,000 hours kind of idea of, you practice something enough deliberately, you can become an expert at it. But I think it's going to be really variable depending on the kind of predilection you have for that particular skill, the types of training you get, the opportunities you get. I was reminded of this idea that if you want to become proficient at something, get lessons. But if you want to become an expert, teach yourself.
Yeah.
And I really love this idea that there's different paths to the same kinds of outcomes. And I think that's one of the really things I love about creativity is that it relies on this habitual kind of process where you're playing around with the habits, but trying them in different ways and seeing what sticks.
Krisha, you've been a pilot since 2009. How much practice did it take for you to learn how to fly?
Oh, well, more than the average person, because I have a condition called aphantasia, which means I can't visualise. I have no visual, my mind's eye is blind. And I realised when I was learning to fly that being able to visualise would actually be a fairly useful thing for a pilot to have. So I think it took me twice as long, but it didn't stop me.
So you kind of learned in a way because of that lack of visualisation?
That's exactly what I did. So I formed both habits and routines. I think there's a sort of muscle memory habit that you get from doing something repeatedly over and over again. That happens with flying too. It goes into your muscle memory.
So there are parts of flying a plane that are habitual. What parts would they be?
If I don't fly for a while, I get to test this because you realise what slips and what doesn't. So I had a whole hiatus over COVID where I didn't fly at all. And I realised immediately that the things that I'd learnt to do with my muscles stayed. So I could take off, I could land, I could do a steep turn and a stall. But what I couldn't do was remember the procedures. So like what the radio calls were or which taxiway was what, or those were the things that didn't stick.
What habits have you built into your pre-flight routine?
So I think it's about knowing yourself and your weaknesses, your pre-flight routine, and then building it around that. So I'm a bit of a slacker by nature, which is not an excellent thing for a pilot to be. So I'm vigilant about my walk-around routine, which checks the aeroplane. And I've sort of built it around this app that I use that allows me to check off everything so that I don't slack, so that I make sure that every time I've done something, I've touched it and I've touched the app and I've made sure that I've ticked it off because, negligence can kill you.
We've been hearing about that unconscious nature of habits. Would it be considered a risk if you relied only on habits to fly?
Most definitely, because aviation is full of moving parts that you can't control.
Would it be fair to say you have to become conscious about something not becoming a habit?
Yes, that would be fair, absolutely.
Because if it becomes a habit, you're likely to get potentially complacent.
Correct, and complacency is what kills.
Okay.
And it really does bite you on the arse. That's the one thing you want to avoid, complacency.
Is there a difference between new pilots who are just learning and veteran pilots who have all the skills?
Yes, absolutely. There's a happy spot, and it's different for everybody. There's no one special number, but the approximate happy spot is 1,000 hours, where pilots get complacent. So if you're going to go flying on a Joy flight, try and get the younger pilot who's relatively new, who's been there, but 500 hours is pretty good. Or get the one who's been doing it for a really long time and has had a couple of scares and has sort of realised that complacency still kills no matter how experienced you are.
So the middle ground, you feel like you're on top of everything, everything's fine, but haven't necessarily had those scares?
Because you haven't had an accident yet.
Yet.
And then something's going to happen to scare you and that complacency will then shift.
And what happens if you become complacent?
Yes, well, it does bite you on the arse. We have a saying, there are old pilots and there are bold pilots, but there are no old, bold pilots. And that's a good one to remember. Complacency undoes you. It stops you, it makes you slack, it stops you from being aware, it makes you lazy.
Vanessa, you're a former marathon runner. When did you start running?
I've always been very active. Growing up, I played a lot of tennis and netball, and I ran a few times a week just to keep fit. But it was after I graduated from university that I moved to North Queensland, and I just started running more and more. My 10K runs became 12, which became 14, and so on. And at the end of that year, I ran my first marathon. I didn't break any records, but I did quite well, and I really enjoyed it. And then the 18 months after that, I ran 2 more marathons and took about 30 minutes off my time. And then a year after that, I finished 3rd at the Melbourne Marathon in under 3 hours. And I guess that's when my running became a bit more than just a healthy habit. It became a little bit obsessive and started to take over my life.
At your peak, how much exercise were you doing?
I was doing about 150 kilometres a week. That's in addition to cycling to work and working all day as a physio, so being on my feet all day. And before I knew it, I was probably doing about 50% more in terms of mileage than what I was supposed to do.
Many of us have an exercise routine or would like to. Would you describe yours as that, or was it a habit?
I consider my relationship with exercise, with running, on a bit of a spectrum. It started off as a healthy habit or routine, you know, I just wanted to keep fit and healthy and it made me feel good. But then evolved into a passion where I just loved it, I craved it, I just wanted that endorphin release. It then evolved into more of an obsession. That's when it became unhealthy and I just, I couldn't stop thinking about it and I just wanted more, even if I didn't feel well or I was injured. I just wanted to push harder. And then eventually it led to an addiction where I couldn't actually go without it. I was, suffering withdrawal symptoms if I missed a session, and that's where, it became very unhealthy.
When did you first notice that those running habits were becoming a problem for you?
It didn't happen overnight. It was more a gradual process. I think there's a fine line between exercising a lot but it still being healthy and then exercising and it being unhealthy. And when you're sort of caught up in it, it's really difficult to know when you've crossed that line. I became controlled by this voice in my head that kept telling me to push harder, to do more, and it became quite impossible to escape that voice. It became a real battle. I think also when I no longer felt the high that you feel when you exercise, but rather I felt an extreme low or emptiness when I missed a session. And also I started lying to people around me about how much exercise I was doing, so I was trying to hide it. So deep down I knew that what I was doing was not healthy and it was an addiction, but I was in denial and I would never have admitted that. And if anyone tried to talk to me about it, I would just shut them down.
Was this all having an effect on your body?
Absolutely. It affected my menstrual cycle, so I didn't have a period for a few years. One of the most significant, warning signs that I was overtraining was developed 2 stress fractures over a couple of months. But again, I chose to ignore that as a warning sign. And then a few months after those stress fractures, I was hit with severe debilitating fatigue and neurological symptoms that no doctor, no medical test could explain. I felt drunk, dizzy, foggy, unbalanced 24 hours a day. I had a lot of symptoms in my legs, numbness. I felt like my legs weren't connected to me. I felt like I was walking up and down stairs when I wasn't. So really disturbing symptoms that, were very, very distressing. And I didn't know at the time, but that was to be the beginning of 4 years of battling those symptoms.
Wow. Gina, when does a habit flip into addiction?
There are characteristics that overlap both habits and addictions, but one of the biggest differences is the reward system in our brain, which primarily is dopamine. So when we are enacting a habit, especially in the early days, we get a reward in our brain that helps us to reinforce that habit, and that's why we do it over and over again. In addictions, though, that reward system is significantly dialed up, and we get a huge rush, and we get this big reward, this big dopamine hit that makes us feel elation. And because of that high, we tend to not only just crave that addictive behaviour a lot, it makes it really difficult to break.
Dave, why do you think you've developed certain habits over your life?
Well, I think because of searching for the highs, and the highs of drinking or drugs, which is I revisited recently with vaping. So, always searching for the highs. And I'm probably also addicted to stand-up comedy as well, or to doing comedy. And it is something that probably do put it before my family a lot of the time, which is, probably not great actually, thinking about it. Yeah, so I'll hide stand-up comedy gigs from my wife. It's like, I remember the other day I rang her and I thought I was on a plane to Hobart actually, and I thought, I haven't told her I'm going. And I thought, what if this plane crashes? And then she thinks the plane's crashed on the way to Hobart and doesn't realise I'm on it because I was doing a gig in Hobart. So.
What would you say has been the hardest habit of yours to kick?
Look, right now I'm trying to kick the phone addiction, which is everyone has basically, and that constant looking at, again, searching for joy through your phone, which is, and again, this morning I actually decided I'm not going to look at my phone straight away. And I really, when we look around at the world, whenever we look up from our phones, we just see everyone else, literally every person on a bus or a train or a tram just staring at their phones. And that's something I really do want to kick, because I think it isn't. And my son is doing it as well. He's just turned 14. He's got a phone and he's staring at it all the time. So that's something I want to be able to kick, so that I can show him or my daughters that you don't have to look at your phone all the time. It's crazy how addictive that is.
And what about in the past, when looking at sort of vaping, alcohol, marijuana? Which of those has been the hardest for you to kick?
Look, I think alcohol probably was the toughest, just because it's so ingrained in society. So, I haven't had a drink since 1992 either. So, yeah, that's probably the toughest one.
Yeah. Catherine, you've been sober since 2019. What's made you stop drinking?
I wasn't a habitual drinker. I was more a binge drinker. And it was something that started in my life as a teenager. I started drinking a lot when I went out socially. I had a lot of positive feedback about being a female who could drink a lot. And particularly in Australian culture, it was really celebrated. I felt like my drinking was a positive part of my identity. But alongside that was also the negative feedback that I was getting, I guess, from waking up and not remembering things, feeling like it didn't really connect with my own identity and the person that I wanted to be. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to kick the habit. So in my 20s and 30s, I had 3 children. I'd take extended periods away from drinking, but this binge drinking habit that I had started in my teens was one that I just wasn't able to moderate or stop. So I would come up with all these different rules around my drinking, only have 3 drinks, only have a water every other drink, so many rules, and I couldn't stop. I would always find myself at a point where I drank more than I wanted to, I'd black out, I wouldn't remember, and it was in my mid-40s when I had a huge breakthrough moment where I decided that instead of focusing on quitting drinking, I was going to focus on embracing the positives of an alcohol-free life, and that was the real shift for me.
And you've been sober ever since then?
I have, but interestingly, 6 weeks into that experience, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I was thrown a huge curveball. And that for me was really interesting, because all of a sudden, a massive challenge comes into your life. And how have I dealt with challenges in the past? I used to drink. So for me, again, a lot of questions started to come up. What should I do? Is this the right time in life to be giving up drinking? But I guess I started to do quite a lot of research into the links between alcohol consumption and increased breast cancer risk, and decided that definitely it was a motivation for me to continue to live the alcohol-free life.
How much of your drinking was automatic behaviour?
A lot of it was very automatic. Environmentally, being in sort of parties, very much I would drink very quickly. Even if I said to myself, you should drink more slowly, it would just happen. There was almost a tipping point. So, 4 drinks or 5 drinks in, bang, the tipping point was there, and it was just sort of subconscious behaviour.
Mac, how much can our environment shape the habits that we form?
Oh, I think it's incredibly important. Creating situations where you can remove the trigger can be a huge impact on whether or not you actually become more deliberate or become more automatic.
Chess is a game of strategy, calculation, and pattern recognition. If you play chess, your brain starts to make better decisions subconsciously. I'm David Smurden, a chess grandmaster and 7-time chess Olympian. I'm also a behavioural economist who applies many habits I've learnt on the chessboard to everyday life. What researchers are increasingly discovering is that playing chess can help children to develop positive habits and life skills without them even realising. Things like patience, anticipating problems, and taking calculated risks are all strengthened through a game of chess.
Chess helps me think smarter, so I could use that in class. Problem solving, I guess.
Chess also enhances your ability to be aware of all possibilities and plan ahead. You don't always make the move that gives you an immediate reward. You look ahead to figure out what will benefit you in the long run. Say you want to buy a house you've got to think of all the variables that could come into play. Can you weather the storm of future rate rises? Are you thinking of starting a family? You don't know exactly what's going to happen, so you have to plan for everything. You're thinking 10 steps ahead.
Every single move basically is a gambit, and like there's so many different moves and possibilities you can do within the game.
As humans, we're not naturally very good at these things. We've got instincts and impulses from millions of years of evolution, and they're hard to overcome. But if we can accelerate that process when we're young, we'll be better equipped to deal with whatever our opponent throws at us in life.
Tony, did you play chess in prison?
Yeah, I did. I learnt to play chess in prison, yeah.
Did that or any other activity help you manage the habits that you subconsciously developed in jail?
It made me a lot more strategic, if you like, and made me think about the other options, to be not so reactive.
Mac, are there other activities which can help us unconsciously build healthy habits?
Everything we do is a mixture of unconscious and conscious processes all together, and really questioning what we're doing in some circumstances, trying to be deliberate about what we're doing and think carefully about why it is that we're choosing to grab the cookie rather than the apple.
What about things like playing games, doing crosswords, that sort of other part of the brain that's being used? Does that help?
There's actually a bunch of studies have actually come out quite recently that show that video game playing in kids, it's often much maligned in the media, is actually really positive for their performance in really difficult problem-solving scenarios like the ones we're talking about in that chess video.
Gina, are there any tried and tested methods for beating bad habits?
Thankfully, yes. We are creatures of habit. You know, up to 70% of everything we do is habitual, but our brains are constantly rewiring. So we absolutely do have the power to break our old habits. There are two proven methods to do that. And the first one I call reprogramming. It's all about reprogramming a new habit in place of that old one. So for example, if the habit is to come home and have a glass of wine, what you want to do is reprogram something else that's going to make you feel like you're unwinding. With time, that new habit is going to feel like second nature. And the other way you can break a habit is by restructuring your environment. For example, if you're drinking at a party and that's your trigger, then don't go to the parties. It's really restructuring the spaces that are triggering your unwanted habits.
Dave, you recently quit vaping. Did a supportive environment play a role for you?
Absolutely, yes. My wife, who was very keen for me to quit, which is good. She wants me to stay alive, which I appreciate, so yes.
It's always a good thing.
She was Googling the issues with it, and that was, yes, confronting some of them. So erectile dysfunction, one of them apparently. So, and it's good that she didn't want that to happen for me. So.
You've kicked a lot of bad habits over your lifetime, including smoking, drinking, adult content. What's been the secret to your success?
I suppose determination, just going right back to stopping drinking back in, you know, when I was still 21. So I was a massive binge drinker as well. And I just stopped. And I said, that's it. And I accepted I wasn't going to do it again.
Wow.
So being able to accept that you're never going to do something again, which things like, I imagine stealing and, you know, other things and drinking and many things. You accept you're never going to do it again. And once you accept that, well, then it becomes pretty easy, really.
Vanessa, your daily running habits deteriorated into what you describe as an exercise addiction. What made you stop?
The turning point for me was when my husband and I decided we wanted to start a family. I knew deep down that I wasn't fertile, that I hadn't been for many years. I knew that I had two options. Either I would spend thousands of dollars on fertility treatment and probably still not get pregnant, or I could change my ways and start looking after myself. So because I suddenly had this new goal of falling pregnant, I was able to flick a switch. I set myself this huge goal, but also smaller goals to lead up to that big goal. And I went from exercising 14 times a week to 3 times. I stopped racing. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, which I know sounds crazy to most people, to sit on the couch and just eat more and put on weight. But I managed to do it. I put on 7 kilos in 2 months, and I was very fortunate to fall pregnant a couple of months after that.
Wow.
And then, you know, once I had the baby, I got back into running, but it was like something had reset in my brain that part of my brain that had controlled me and told and forced me to exercise to extreme had reset, and so I was content exercising in moderation.
Catherine, you've been sober for coming on to 4 years now. After you realised your drinking habits had become a problem for you, what helped you break that pattern?
Acceptance and taking self-responsibility and not comparing myself to other people. I didn't have to worry what anyone else thought. If I wanted to change, it was up to me. And so when I took responsibility and I made that choice, that was really empowering.
Sally, you experienced burnout a number of times as a result of your workaholic habits. What advice would you give to others who are looking to do the same thing, to avoid that path?
I think really reassess if you're defining your worth through your productivity. Not dissimilar to the drinking culture in Australia, I think there is also very much a culture around work, and your worth is determined by your work and your productivity. So, and it's not saying that you become lazy all of a sudden, but it's very much creating a set of boundaries and keeping very firm to them, identifying what your true capacity is and owning what is right for you. So it's essentially almost an audit of your habits that I've found.
Gina, what are your hacks for incorporating new habits into our everyday daily lives?
Start small. It sounds so trivial, but we really just want our brain just to take the first step. And once we develop the first step, the rest will follow. The second thing is to be consistent. Creating a new habit is all about consistency, not intensity. And then celebrate all the small wins. Our brain loves that reward. So for example, if you want to start flossing your teeth every day, which is, I know, a habit that most Australians need to develop, so my dentist says, try putting the floss on your toothbrush. You can't pick up your toothbrush without getting the floss out of the way. So you do all these little things, but it's really starting so small.
Kate, you lost 30 kilos over about 3 years. How did you do it?
It's interesting because everyone's got this concept of starting small and being consistent, and that's exactly what I did. I started small with most changes, like little tweaks here and there.
How long did it take before those small changes stopped sort of feeling like such a chore in a way and became more automatic?
Some of them took a while, so the exercise habit, I feel, took a little bit longer, and I guess I was getting rewarded in many different ways. I was reducing my stress from being out. I was breaking old habits of not going to the fridge and drinking wine and eating cheese. So there were different rewards happening, but probably that took me months, like a few months, until I was really reaping the benefits of presence and being on my walk and oxygenating my brain, and I'm feeling really fit and healthy. I'm not puffing on a flat surface. So that took a little while.
Tony, you spent 20 years in and out of jail.
Yep.
How were you overcoming those institutionalised habits that you developed while you were inside?
One of the hardest things that I found about change is, one, remembering that you're actually trying to do it, and two, redefining who you believe you are. And I still struggle with that today. I found a wallet on the street probably 12 months ago now, and I'd done the righty. I took it into the police station and he asked me my name, and I said, I'm not telling you. And he said, why not? And I said, because as soon as I do, you'll think I stole it. But it's also redefining yourself, and I still struggle with that today. I've always been a crook, I've always been a rowdy bug, I've always been a drink, always involved with drugs and all that sort of stuff and my life. I actually find more reward at the end of the day knowing that I've gone to the pub and brought a Coke or a cup of coffee, or taken a wallet to the police station and all that sort of stuff. I'm starting to find my amount of glee would have been about the amount of money that we just pulled out of the safe that we cut open. And, it's all momentary. The stuff that I'm going through now and feeling now is lasting, and that's what I really enjoy. Yeah.
And you have something written on your door, I believe?
Choose to change your mind.
Choose to change your mind.
Yeah, we can define ourselves any way we like, but if you want to change it, change your mind. It's as simple as that. But, you know, you've got to, we're such creatures of habit, we keep falling back into ourselves all the time. It's like walking down the street, you know, you go the same way all the time. And I thought, bugger it, I'll go up that street. And I walked up that street and actually had a look at all the buildings and the people around, and it was actually a good trip, you know. I was happy about it, you know, it had a bit of value to it. Just by simply changing my mind, recognising where you are, who you are, and changing it. And, you know, it's just as simple as changing your mind.
Tony, thank you so much, and thank you to you all for being here. If you want to catch up on this episode or any others, you can always jump onto SBS On Demand. I'll see you next time.